Welcome to another edition of the Best Business Minds, where we interview business leaders and academics that write thought-provoking books. I'm Marc Kramer, a serial entrepreneur who consults with family businesses and entrepreneurs. Today, our guest is Jan Cavelle, author of Scale for Success. Jan, welcome. And Jan is in England, so we're thrilled to have someone across the pond that we'll be speaking with today. Jan, give us a little bit about your professional background.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for inviting me on the show, firstly. I am an entrepreneur from England, as you rightly say, and I've had businesses, small businesses, all my life, really, till in recent years. And I'm now in the very lucky position of following a childhood dream of being an author, but putting that together with my other passion, which is entrepreneurship, which I've got involved in all sorts of ways, both with my own businesses and also in campaigns to encourage others over the years. So I'm loving it.
What are you doing now?
I love both sides of it. I love the writing. I love talking to people about entrepreneurship. I obviously hate COVID, the same as everybody else, but I find it fascinating how business is evolving. And, you know, I love talking about entrepreneurship. I love hearing from other entrepreneurs and helping people to come a little bit away along the ladder.
So most of what you're doing now is consulting work?
Yeah, mostly, and an awful lot of writing. You know, so as I say, it was my intention to retire altogether. So this has been a whole new thing.
Oh, well, that would have been a waste of all that experience. You can't retire. I know guys in their late 80s and 90s are still going at it, and they're wondering what would they do with themselves if they didn't do that. There's only so much golf and travel you can do. Well, why did you write this book? And I thought it was great, all the examples you gave and all the CEOs, because I like that type of thing myself. So why did you write this book?
I wrote it for two reasons. Firstly, from my own personal experience, I'd find that the leap that we talk about in the book, from approximately 1 to 10 million, depending on sector, and pounds and dollars, but, you know, give or take, is incredibly hard, and very few people talk about it. You know, we know that startups are hard, and, you know, corporations seem so far off in the distance for most of us when we start that, you know, it's just never going to come into our orbit. But that change from your tiny business into something that's going to grow is a real chasm that people have to cross. And I didn't realize it was going to be so hard. And I didn't realize, once I'd established that I found it jolly hard, I didn't realize that lots and lots of people find it hard. But you know, this is a common challenge with other entrepreneurs. So I thought, well, why not try and address that problem, as it's something that's slightly less talked about in startups. And in the way of addressing it, I think peer-to-peer learning is great for entrepreneurs. And I wondered if I could bring a sort of element of that to the book, which is what I've attempted to do.
Well, you did a great job with it. What's your definition of scaling? And did that match how other entrepreneurs define scaling as you were interviewing them?
Excuse me. I think, you know, scaling has become a bit time influenced, because, of course, scaling used to be, sorry, I swallowed my water down entirely the wrong way. Scaling was very much influenced in financial terms, but when you got investment, that was, and started to grow very fast, that was scaling. Now you can still scale without the investment if you choose to go that route, and you can, depending on your sector again and everything else. It's more about sustainable growth, I think, now, which may or may not have investment attached. But investments become much more attainable to startups, which of course it never was. You know, it was only for businesses further down the line.
So some of the folks who are watching this do run non-for-profits as well. Is there a difference between scaling a nonprofit and a for-profit business?
Well, I've never run a non-profit, but I think from talking to other entrepreneurs, I think the difference probably most of all is in financing. and in getting investment. And there's some entrepreneurs who I know of that have swapped their non-profit to a profit-making entity to get the investment. Now, whether that's a clash of moral values that, investors need companies to be more focused on profit or what, I'm not quite sure. But I think it's mostly investment driven.
I hope you're feeling okay. Do you need to take a second?
Fine, sorry about that.
No worries, no worries. You write about mission and vision statements. How do you make sure they are substantive and are bought into by the employees and clients? Because a lot of them are bullshit, and nobody buys and nobody really believes them.
You're absolutely right. And particularly they used to be always something you sort of drummed up with somebody who could write some good copy, and you all sat around going, we want to be the best at what we do, as you rightly say. And I think I think Gen Z particularly is having a big influence on that, because I think companies are moving, well, not just Gen Z, but some of the layers above them. But I think companies are moving to being genuinely driven by the need or the desire to have impact on the world, and looking at profit as something they need to generate to increase that impact, which is a very different way from the old way of thinking we're out to make a profit and we need to produce a nice little copy that makes us look good.
What was the Outland Denim Company's mission and vision statements, and did the employees play a role in their development? So you might tell the audience who hasn't yet read the book what the Outland Denim Company is.
The Outland Denim Company is a company that I believe is, if you're into your fashion, is very successful in the States, but it's actually Australian based. And it's a great story. The man who started it is a man called James Bartle. And he literally by chance watched the film Taken and was so appalled by the human trafficking stories in there. But he set out to find more about it and what he could do about it. And he spent 10 years researching it before actually launching Outland Denim, which does sell denim clothing, mainly jeans, obviously. But it's about the effects they have as a company. And he chose something that he could produce that would have the effects he wanted. So the choice of what they did was entirely orientated by what he wanted to do, which was have impact on freeing up people from imprisonment, empowering people and improving the environment at the same time, because he found that if it's bad environments enforce poverty, which gave away human control at the same time. So he works with predominantly Cambodia people. He has factories over there, but unlike a lot of the conditions there, he educates everybody who works for him so they can go on and look after their families properly and have houses and things they'd never dreamt of having. So he makes a real change.
Did the employees have a role in the development of the mission and vision statements?
I don't think they did originally, because he did, as I say, he didn't launch for 10 years, and they don't as such have a vision and mission. They have a manifesto which they sort of set out. But James, I talked to him about this, because you don't get much more purpose-led than that. And yet he said, it's really too big a concept to put in a little sort of advertising thing. So they have their manifesto. They state that the whole purpose is about human empowerment and sustainability, environmental sustainability. But that's what they're all about. Everything is to do with that.
So the people who've joined him already believe in this mission and vision.
They do, absolutely. And he was saying to me during COVID that, their first reaction was, what can we do as long as the people in Cambodia aren't impacted? What can we do? We'll take pay cuts, whatever is necessary. Let's keep them safe. And that was from his team in Australia. It's amazing.
One of the questions I get asked a lot by new entrepreneurs is how quickly do they have to get to profitability? I mean, because it used to be when I was younger, and I'm 60 now, that you had 5 years to get to profitability. And now a lot of venture people want you to break even within a year or 2 years and be profitable within 2 to 3 years. So from your research, how long did it typically take these great businesses to get profitable?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I was racking my brains as being of similar age to you as to how long it was when I started out, and I was remembering that it was usually a 3-year expectation, but not that dissimilar from you. And yes, absolutely, as Adam has just said, we've now got a situation where one or two of the real big tech companies like Uber are still not profitable. Which is for people who go back as far as we do, almost difficult to understand. Why would you set up a business that was not going to be profitable after all that time? But yeah, so you've got very different expectations in different sectors, I think. The
And
unicorns are allowed to postpone.
Some of them run on cash flow expectations as opposed to profitability, because Uber is enormous and there is a way for them to get profitable, but they keep making these additional investments. And so I think it's not either you're growing fast and you're showing that at some point you'll be profitable. I mean, it was like 20 years until Amazon became profitable, but they were pushing.
They've done all right now.
Yeah. Yeah, they could buy their own country and rename it. Do you see a difference between men and women entrepreneurs? And if so, what is it, from your research?
I think, the figures still show that both minorities of any sort, including women, get less funding. It's improving, but it's got a long way to go. Just as we don't have as many women at board level and everything else.
Do you see a difference in how they operate? Like, is there a difference? Do they operate the same way? Is women have a different style of doing things? Did you notice any differences when you were interviewing folks?
I think the women, they're not going to love me for this, but I think quite a lot of women are less secure than the men because they're still, slightly outside their comfort zone. They're slightly more defensive, not unconsciously, I think, but yeah, there's a certain element of that with some of them.
Do you think men are more risk-taking than women? They're more conservative?
I don't know. It's difficult. I mean, I have to say that I remember being interviewed myself for a group of that were promoting enterprise, again, like I was saying to you, I did regularly. And they went round at the end after all the interviews and they said, we'll tell you why you were chosen. And I happened to be at the end, and it got to me, and they were all, going to all the others, because you did very, very well at this, because you did very well at that, to all the men. And they got to me and they said, because you were busy, biggest risk taker. So I don't think it always follows.
So essentially, from your own research, you didn't see anything different?
Just for lack of being able to get finance. I think it's a real big one.
Well, why do you think that is?
I think we're still new to the table, relatively speaking. I mean, I know that people would shake their heads and say that's outrageous and one thing and another. But, comparatively speaking, over the years, we are still newish to the table. Yeah, and people change their minds and their opinions and what they used to slowly. There's still a lot of prejudice. I met huge amounts of prejudice as a woman entrepreneur, sadly.
Hard to believe in 2021 that would be the case. One of your entrepreneurs, Bev, who had many businesses, pointed out the need to understand 4 essential components of marketing. What are they, and why is it important?
That was my friend Bev, unless I'm very much mistaken. Yes, the 4 segments of marketing. I mean, she was spelling my as my mind's going to go a complete blank here. Your value proposition, what you're actually offering the client, and on top of that, your differential, why you're going to offer it, either offer something different or offer it in a different way. Knowing your market, knowing your research, and of course your cost of acquisition, because unless you've got a reasonable cost of acquisition of a client, you haven't got a viable business on the financial front. So it comes down to sort of viability of a business, and also on top of that, actually really knowing your stuff and having got a great market offering, which is fair enough, but it's specific.
But when do you plan for scaling? Because you mentioned pre-planning for it, and it sounds like you should assume your product or service will take off. So, which is great. You have great confidence that that's going to be the case. But when should you start really thinking about scaling your business, or should that be built in from the very beginning?
I think it should be built in from a very early stages. And yes, I do think you need to have confidence. You need to have confidence once you've done your research that there is space in the market and the market does want your product. But once you establish that, then I think you should have confidence. But I also think that the good entrepreneurs are adaptable and able to change their offering. And, you know, we've seen so much of that in COVID. Goodness knows, the great entrepreneurs have been pivoting left, right, and centre to survive in difficult sectors. You know, so I don't think it's set in stone what you're doing. It's building a good company that can deliver great things.
What kinds of skills, experience, and gender diversity do you look for in a business? And what do you think businesses that want to scale should be looking for?
I think people, you know, it's got so much more open about hiring now. I mean, I'm not personally a fan of enforced anything, but, you know, the fact that we are open to hiring everybody and anybody is just fantastic. And of course, we've also got, with COVID, we've got more open to global talent. You know, because people are working remotely, you know, so we've got this huge incredible global workforce to pull on, either on a temporary basis or project work, which is what I tend to use now, you know, or actually for an employee. It's quite normal to have your business in London and be hiring somebody from Australia or wherever in a small town to do X, Y, and Z because they've got right skill sets, which is fantastic. And it doesn't make one hoot's bit of difference anymore who they are, what they believe in, where they come from, which is great. And it's just how it should be.
I mean, every study you see from Harvard, Wharton, some of the other major schools all show that diversity not just gets you a little bit of a good shot in terms of sales and creativity and so forth, but like huge, like 23% to, as I've seen, as high as 36% improvement in a company by having that diverse workforce. Who should review the resumes and ask the question? Should it be someone internal or hire someone externally? You mentioned a variety of skills needed to execute on putting a team together to scale. So what did you learn and what's your advice there?
I think putting a team together is probably the hardest challenge of scaling, actually. And I think it depends on the amount of people you're hiring and the size you are and everything else. I mean, it can clearly become impractical for the CEO to look at every resume. So, you know, you may be sorting out somebody to hire lower down or to at least profile and send out the resumes. But for hiring your top team, you know, it is, and people senior, it's got to be, I think, the person at the top who chooses them. It's just too important. You're looking for amazing people who can do as well, if not better than you know, and also have the right mindset and the right attitude. And I think it's really important that you know that gives. And I also think increasing numbers of people are allowing their own teams to have a say in who's recruited, and I think that's great as well.
Some of the most successful entrepreneurs I've worked with, the only people they would hire, at least in the beginning, were other people with who were recommended by the organization. So you didn't get into the club unless somebody on the existing company knew you, vouched for you, and brought you in. And
I've heard of that one.
Yeah. Do you think as the company starts growing, do you think you should hire an outside recruiter, or have somebody inside who really is involved with the culture day to day?
Oh dear, you're going to get me shot again. I think in my early days, I worked in recruitment, so I've probably got a bit of a jaundiced point of view of them. I don't think they're ever going to have your interests quite as much at heart as somebody who is part of your company.
But good to have that
Necessarily.
internal person. What kind of experience does the person evaluating future staff and needs should they have? What's the background they should have?
I think their background needs to be focused on people. I think they need to be high up because, you don't want somebody who's just started and done a bit of HR before. You're talking about one of the most important functions in the business is choosing your team.
But they should
It's
have
so
line
key.
experience. You feel they should have line and operating experience?
I think it helps if they've had line and operating experience and really understand actually how the business works. I've had HR people who really have no actual operational understanding, and that's a distinct drawback, I think. I don't see how they can do their job as well.
There's a question from the audience. Does a longer term business plan for scaling typically include swapping out leadership on the notion that the startup skill set and business acumen is significantly different than the 10 to 20 million skill set? So what do you think about that and what did you learn?
I think that's a really interesting question. I think, we're almost also talking about a swap from being this startup lead, whatever title, founder, to being a proper grown-up CEO. And I think what I'm seeing a lot of at the moment is founders who automatically become CEOs. And particularly for first-time founders, they don't actually have the skill set. Some of them can develop it, and some of them can't. And of course, that's why a lot of VCs, it's traditional that a lot of VCs kick founders out, and we've heard lots of often unpleasant stories about that. But the fact remains is it is a different skill set. And you either need training or practice or time to develop, and you may or may not be able to develop, and it may or may not suit you. And you may not enjoy it either, actually.
Yeah. Or you may not be interested, right? You may not be interested in it.
Yeah.
You love the creativity in the beginning,
Absolutely.
the excitement, but once you have a big organization, all you're expected to do is think about strategy and meet major clients. It might be a lot less interesting to you, especially if you're the type that likes to be very hands-on.
You're so right, Mark. I've seen this a lot with, small businesses that have got to a certain, the owners got to a certain stage and they're suddenly terribly bored with, same old every day.
Yeah. And they feel like they just can't make what's the contribution they're making? They feel like they're not even earning their paycheck anymore, where they felt like when they were working 14, 15 hours a day, 7 days a week. Now they can see it. One of the entrepreneurs you interviewed worked in the early stages of Oracle entering Europe. What did he learn about their preparation for growth when it came time to hiring people, and why did they do it that way?
That was, I think that was a man called Stephen Kelly, who worked for Oracle, and he also was CEO for Sage, and he's now head of Tech Nation over here. And he had a fantastic chance, I think, because he worked with so many amazing people at Oracle, from Mark Benioff onwards, and people who went on with Salesforce, etc. But I think they were all about people development. Larry Ellison, was about developing people to be as good as they could be, if not better than they ever could be. And I think that's the approach that Stephen Kelly does with his team. To this day, I think he puts the team development absolutely at the front of everything he does.
You wrote, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, and he keeps them very motivated by their own development, very excited about developing. I think you must have a skill set of finding, well, of being a great leader, which is fantastic, but also choosing quite secure people to work for him, because there's this confident, positive feedback, but people don't take it as criticism. I don't think they take it as, oh, worry, we can do better next week, which is the ideal.
I've seen, I worked with a company where the two partners were together for 13 years. And one day, one of the partners said to the one who wore the CEO hat, I think we should bring someone in to help us get us to the next level. The next day when he came back, the guy changed all the locks and felt he was trying to get rid of him. He goes, I'm not trying to get rid of you. I'm just saying we're not making enough money. We're not making as much as we could be making at this juncture. And maybe we need to interview somebody else, because he was the technical guy, the CEO. And they ended up in lawsuits that lasted for a couple of years. And the CEO technical guy ended up buying him out, but he really devastated his own business. You read that one of your CEOs said experiencing failure is a good thing. Why is that?
A couple of them said it, and I've heard other people too. Russell Dalgleish, who's actually an investor in VC now, said he's done lots of things horribly wrong and things horribly right. And he doesn't care in the least, because it teaches, what did he say, emotional resilience and emotional intelligence and resilience. Stephen Kelly actually was hard. I can't remember it, for Chordiant, and he nearly wasn't hard because he hadn't had a failure, and that's much more recognized, I think, by a lot of great American companies as part of developing. I'm always reminded of the Kipling quote, if you can meet triumph and disaster and treat those imposters just the same. And I think there's a lot in that still, and it can be applied to business failure and success.
Those of us who've been serial entrepreneurs always talk more when we're telling stories about our failures than our successes, right? Because we don't even know why we succeeded in most cases, but we certainly know why we failed. Like, we've made mistakes after we've looked at them. We said, what was I thinking?
Yeah, very true. But I think you're right. I think that's good. We're not as secure as people imagine we are, I don't think. And therefore success isn't necessarily that comfortable for us.
How do you create a meritocracy? Because many high growth organizations become bureaucracies. So what does the leader do to attract and retain star players and avoid retaining mediocrity? Because we've seen lots of great companies who failed, Wang Laboratories, things that you and I have seen during our professional careers, where they were once powerhouses and cease to exist today.
I think it's very difficult. I think it's very easy, actually, for even just one bad member of staff to destroy an entire culture. But I also think it comes back to a little bit of what I was saying, is people, would like to be secure enough in that company to want to do better and accept that they are on a learning mission. And that means that, they need to have tremendous trust in the leadership. And I also think if we're talking sales, I think people like competition. I still think, I know sales has evolved a lot, but I do think sales people are competitive, and they need to be inspired to compete against each other, to do better, to get higher figures.
I never worry about mediocrity with sales, because they're either you're really pushing it and you want to go past your quota because you're insatiable, and your bonuses are set in a way that should make you insatiable. I kind of worry about all the other folks behind the lines that are there every day, and the creative types being pushed out the door because there's so many rules in place.
Yeah, it's that terribly difficult balance, and I think that's one of the killers when you make this sort of leap from startup to a bigger company. Is that, of course, there's loads of people on hand to say, oh, well, you must structure it, and you must have, X number of manuals and job descriptions and everything, and it is a terrible killer of creativity, that. And all of a sudden, what was fun becomes onerous, so I think it's. a wise and experienced person who recognizes that and still generates for fun. Yes, they've got job descriptions if need be, they've got manuals, and so on, but they keep the fun right up there because people need to love being at work.
When are entrepreneurs looking for investors, what type of angels and VCs, because you talk about this in the book, are most helpful in helping a company scale?
I think it's one of the wonderful things that have really happened more since my day. It's angels. And, because I think the old-fashioned VCs who made money available to fast-growing companies at almost any price and on entirely their terms, it became such an overcrowded market that the finances opened up for angels. Plus, we had tech companies which needed funding from startup and all sorts of reasons. And I think angels do a great job because I think they get more involved on a personal level. I think they're often more supportive, and it's lonely actually till you've really developed a company of size and you've got a big team who at the top there. It's incredibly lonely, and I think an angel is more likely to, by a long chalk, to be yours and the company's friend and supporter than a VC is, to be honest, unless you're very lucky.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of VCs come from the banking world and not from the entrepreneurial world, where the vast majority of the angels are people who've run companies before.
Yeah.
And so they can add not just the cash value, but also their experience in doing things. And like you said, it's very lonely at the top. And sometimes you don't even want to share your concerns with your top leadership. You really need to talk to somebody else because you don't want to panic everybody because you're internally panicked about whatever's going on. One of your interviewees talks about the fallacies of VCs. Could you please tell us a few of them?
Yeah, David Siegel, he's a very interesting guy. I don't know if you ever come across him. He tends to be very controversial in his ideas, of which they include that VCs know a lot less than I think they know, basically, in his opinion. And he argues that the fallacies are based on lots of things, that they think they know more than they actually do, and that it's their own brilliance and expertise that cause them to be successful with investment when they are successful with investments, rather than the degree of luck, timing, and world influences and everything else that goes into it. And he thinks that there are various other fallacies that people tend to invest when things are going up, for example. And he argues that all investments over the years, if you study them, go up and down. So if you only invest in things when they're up, you're going to come crashing down more likely, whereas, vice versa. He's got a lot of very interesting arguments, as to why, and most of all, he believes that you should diversify massively, and that way you get much better returns. And the VCs who think they're going to make a huge killing with one investment are going to come a cropper sooner or later, if you like.
Well, they never know what that one investment, if that's going to be the right one or not, because even the entrepreneurs don't know. I read that book on Facebook, and Mark Zuckerberg had 4 ventures going, and he thought the one that had the least amount of promise was Facebook. And because he never envisioned Facebook to be what it is today.
No, that I knew, but I didn't know he had 3 others that he thought were going to be more successful.
Yeah, when he was at Harvard. You write about the North Star approach. What is that?
The North Star approach is, I think it's propounded by other people, but in the book I write about it with reference to somebody who teaches at it's not Harvard, it's Stanford, called Darrell Coleman, who's also an entrepreneur in his own right. And I remember him telling me that he first came across it when he was taught it. and when he was studying himself at Stanford, and they said to him, what makes you really cross? And he went on, he said, I was a student, and I held forth. I've talked about how fed up I was of going to the laundrette and how my skateboard got stuck in the potholes. And, it took him till, because they told him to list 100. And it took him till about 67 when he suddenly said, and I hate poverty.
Mhm.
And if you go on long enough, you get to the things that really, matter rather than the fact that you didn't like your lunch or whatever. And it comes down to that. It's a mixture between the things that give you joy and the things that really distress you as motivating factors, rather than being pigeonholed often by education, as so many kids are, or by peer pressure. We're told when we're growing up, I mean, all my peers, girls wanted to go into publishing or wanted to be models, so that's what everybody did, but only because everybody else said so, rather than actually it didn't drive anybody. And that's what North Star approach is all about. It's being driven by genuinely what gets us going, be it happy or angry.
When developing and testing business ideas, you write about the design thinking process. Explain that and who has done it well.
Sure. I mean, the design thinking process is still asking why you do something, but in a more business way. And it's almost a bit of a different way of looking at things to Bev's for that we were talking about at the moment, because it's looking at what you're thinking of doing. Say you're thinking of building a big red tractor, and thinking, is there a market for my big red tractor? Because I really want to build this thing, and that's what I want to sell. And is there a crying need for my big red tractor? And but way before you actually, sort of get to make it. And only when you start getting a prototype do you actually go back to so you don't spend the money immediately, but when you've got a prototype, you can go back to find out whether that big red tractor is what people want, or whether they actually wanted a blue truck. But Dahl also describes it as finding the idea that it solves a hair on fire problem, rather than, if you've got two problems, your leg's itching and your hair's on fire, which is the one that's going to be the right one to go for.
Why are values important, and does that really factor into success? Because many of the star companies, consumers, other businesses, employees question their values, and yet they're super profitable anyway.
They do, and I think there's lots of reasons for that. I think it's because we're seeing, this change brought about by tech connectivity, and people know now, you can't get away with greenwashing anymore. So if you have those old-fashioned statements that say we're great, or of course we care about the environment, when actually you're polluting 10 rivers, you're going to get found out. You can't do it anymore. So I think particularly established companies are a little bit afraid of them, because if you do get exposed on social media or whatever for having fake values, you're going to lose your audience like overnight. But on the plus side, I think it's values that get you and your team out of bed, and bond you together. And also, when they're genuine, they're what builds a brand and builds a following and builds fans and brand ambassadors, because it's values when it comes down to it that people identify with now.
Many entrepreneurs prefer not to use their own money and start and grow their business. I know that was always a preference of mine when I was starting my different ventures, but now I've got money into my own venture. Why do you advocate self-funding?
I don't totally advocate it. I think it's got definite pluses, and it was something I noticed when I was writing in the book, that there was a big age differential, that older entrepreneurs tended to be more pro bootstrapping than younger ones who were more pro going the various funding routes and getting early funding. But I do think if you're in a sector that could possibly go the bootstrapped option, there's a lot to learn from it in the early process. I think it teaches you to understand value and your revenues and your markets in a far more harsh but necessary way, which will stand you in good stead for later on, even if you get that investment later on. And then there's all the genuine financial benefits. You're not paying out for borrowing money when you don't need to. You're owning your slice of the whole pie much longer, maybe forever, which could be a very good thing in the long run.
Yeah, I for them keeping having more of the pie to keep for yourself, but being smart about it for sure.
Yeah.
What's the value of getting involved with an accelerator, and how are they different from business incubators? You remember those business incubators?
Yeah, I mean, all these things are sort of relatively new, or very certainly are in the UK. But I mean, an incubator is very much aimed at a startup idea, and developing startup ideas. They may be run by a group of angels or VC investors or done in conjunction with universities. They tend to provide a co-working space. They will be probably open-ended in duration. And they're about teaching and developing that idea and to push you off into running a successful company. Whereas your accelerator is a set term attendance that you sign up for and pay for. And during that duration, yes, you will get some teaching, but you will also be very much focused on developing your idea to scale it up and also to pitch it at the end in the hope of getting investment.
Yeah, I think that's I saw them as slight differentiators between incubators and accelerators. What's the value of crowdfunding, and do you recommend it? And what are the keys to building a successful crowdfunding campaign? Because you talk about that in the book.
Yeah, I do. I mean, crowdfunding, of course, used to be mainly for charities, and then all of a sudden it's become a mainstream supply of investment for businesses, which is great. I think there's a lot going for it. I think it spreads, obviously, the risk. It is still governed by financial institutions and laws, so there's no carelessness with money. It's still competitive because you can't just get on a platform with a completely rubbish idea. The platform's got to protect themselves. And so there's a lot of, it's still a genuinely competitive, hardworking, proper, sound thing to do, if you like. And I think the advantages of doing it, it spreads the risk, but I think also the investors tend to be people who are really passionately interested in your sector. You wouldn't tend to, get people who are passionate about food investing in a coal mine. You'd get people who are passionate about food. So, I think they bring value in themselves. They bring information, they bring intelligence, and so you've got all sorts of extra assets come with the money.
I think people don't realize it, but in crowdfunding, you got to create your own crowd. People think that they put it on there and strangers just start investing, but nobody knows your page exists until you've generated a lot of money, and then you start moving up in the rankings on those crowdfunding platforms. So they're going to make money no matter what, but you're only going to make money as if you can get your own friends, family, and they can get people to come on and actually invest with you. A question from the audience: as a startup solo entrepreneur in manufacturing, I've learned controlling the process and having several suppliers minimize potential problems. What are your thoughts on having a soft launch to allow you to scale slower and and steadily and more aggressive marketing and seeking funding to rapid growth, providing the products prove successful in the initial sales.
I mean, I love that sort of approach because it is more old school. It's more test it, test it, sell it, prove it, and develop it, without going crazy on something not proven. So it's right up my street, if you want the honest answer. But yeah, so if that's what you're doing, well done you, and lots and lots of luck with it.
Yeah. Besides that, anymore, there's so many options for investors that until you kind of prove it out anyway and show that people are willing to pay for it, you're not going to raise money. It always reminds me of Shark Tank, and I guess you guys watch that in England as well.
Yeah.
Shark Tank, or have your own version of it. You're not going to raise money today without being able to show somebody outside of medical device and biotechnology, the healthcare space. You're not going to be able to raise it because somebody else who's already shown that theirs works is able to go and raise that money. What is I guess it's pre-prototyping methodology? What is that?
Yeah, it's pre-typing, I think, but
Yeah.
but you may be saying it much better than me. But pre-typing as opposed to prototyping, I'm not going to say both of those in the same sentence again.
Yeah.
Is testing out ideas before you've made the prototype, basically. It's getting all the testing of the market done and the ideation without spending too much money and getting as far as the prototype stage. And there's, I'm not going to remember it's an Italian name of a gentleman who wrote the book on it, and he laid out various sort of methods of specific ways of doing it. You may be able to tell me his name.
Yeah, I'm sorry, it was in your book, but I thought that was interesting. And I think a lot of times we save ourselves a lot of headache.
Oh, well done. Somebody's
Alberto.
Yeah, that's the one.
Sevilla. What did you learn is the biggest mistake entrepreneurs make when pitching to investors?
I think for me, it's the same mistake as the biggest mistake entrepreneurs make altogether, is they obsess about their own idea being so brilliant. I always remember when I was teaching sales one day years ago to sort of startups and young companies, and this lady came along to the session and she said, I really need some help with my sales. And I said, okay, what's the problem? And she said, well, I've been going a year and I've yet to make a sale, so I'm obviously selling badly. And I went, oh, tell me a little bit more. And she said, my product's wonderful. I know it is, but nobody seems to want it. So it must be how I'm selling it. And, that says it all. It's not about whether you think it's brilliant, it's whether the market needs it. And in the same way, it's not, if you go to investors and say, this is wonderful, it's such a great idea, it's so original, they're not going to be blown away by that. They're going to be blown away by the market opportunity.
Do you also think that, and I think you said this in your book, that entrepreneurs, especially technical ones, spend so many slides in their slide deck talking about in deep detail about the technology that they lose sight on proving that there's actually a market for what they're doing?
Exactly. I think it's all part and parcel. It's this obsession with, my idea is right. And I think actually the same goes as time goes by, that you see companies flounder, and I've seen it in during COVID. The people who are struggling are the people who clung on to, this is what my business does, without being willing to pivot and look from a different variety and say, okay, well, this is a great company and a great group of people, and we've got a lot of knowledge between us, and so we can do lots of different things and still survive.
With what's happened during this past year with COVID has had a significant impact on how companies work. Is working from home going to grow, and how will that impact innovation and corporate culture if people aren't working together day to day? Because I've even had authors come on, especially ones who focused on neurology, and saying that our brains for people who go into an office have shrunk like 24%. And companies rely on people bumping into each other for creativity. I mean, I can see where the salesperson might not come in, but so many other parts of the business, it's necessary. So what's your take on that?
I think, I mean, personally speaking, I've always loved working at home. So, and I like working in peace and quiet and on my own. And, there's lots of us who like that. And, just as there are lots of people still who like going to an office. So I think it's an individual thing.
But what about for
You know,
companies, where you're
for
trying to
companies,
get
it's a different
teams?
matter.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Now, I mean, some companies were already geared to some degree of hybrid working because of the growth of tech. We were going that way anyway. I think, I don't know what it's like in the States, but particularly in the UK, we're seeing this big governmental push trying to get everybody back to the offices. And I don't think it's going to happen. I think hybrid is here to stay.
I think that governments are worried about real estate prices
Yeah,
dropping like a stone. And if
I
people
agree.
start working from home and they're not working from an office, and companies decide they don't need all or a good chunk of the real estate, all the tax money that goes with that real
Exactly.
estate is going to
Yeah,
be significant, not to mention all the holdings that pension funds have in real estate and that we all have in real estate. If all
yeah.
that drops like a stone, that could be cataclysmic to the economy.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, but I don't think it's a battle they're going to win myself.
Yeah,
Obviously there's some sectors that are going to stay, office bound or factory bound, but I do think it's on the shrink. And I also think, we hear all the negatives about it, but there was also, it spawned new economies like, the culture as a service, whole economy of lots of tech companies starting out working out how we can nail culture for remote companies. And look how well Zoom's done out of it. Yeah, it depends on the company as to how much they've suffered from remote working, really.
you're right. It depends on your stake in. I myself also like working from home, even when I ran other businesses, because you don't have as many meetings. You're able to accomplish a lot more.
Yeah,
You don't feel as accomplished when you're in larger organizations carrying a coffee mug from meeting to meeting and feel like you've
that's
got
right.
nothing accomplished the whole day. You had chapters on marketing and sales. How has the pandemic changed marketing and sales strategy, especially you're somebody who works in that space?
Yeah, that's an interesting one because I was very sales orientated, and as I think I mentioned to you, my son is in the sales in Australia, so I was talking to him about this one. And I think the word that we both like the most is that it's become more collaborative. And I think because he's in B2B, and I think for B2B sales particularly, it's become a question of aligning the supplier with the company buying, because you're essentially on, it's woken people up to the fact you're on the same side. You're both there to survive. You're both there to work out solutions. And it's become much more about that at long last, which I think is a good thing. I think people have had to be more adaptable in sales and marketing and more market aware too. Um, because there's lots of variation and lots of changes going on.
Do you recommend to startup companies, and have you seen from the research you've done, advisory boards, developing advisory boards, or is it kind of a waste, or do entrepreneurs feel like I don't really need that kind of thing? I'm just fine with my own, and especially with my senior leadership.
I think it's difficult. I mean, they're time poor, all entrepreneurs, at startup or scale up stage. And I think it a lot depends on personality. I would have always rather had a good mentor, a good peer group than an advisory board. But I'm just probably not very formalized and corporate minded that I would suit an entrepreneur, suit a board of that type. But some people might. You have to go with what suits you.
I didn't know if you had found from the companies that the entrepreneurs you interviewed, if many of them
I've
had
never
that.
heard, I mean, I haven't had anybody say to me that's what I did actually. No. So I wonder if it's, if in general, the average tends to be that that's too formal, too rigid. I think a lot of people on those advisory boards haven't necessarily ever grown a company themselves. which makes it difficult to identify and really understand the problems.
After all the CEOs you've interviewed, what leadership skills do you need to develop in the post-pandemic world that will help you scale?
Wow. I mean, well, you have to be much more techy, let's face it, than you did 10 years ago. I mean, I know tech was inevitably coming bigger, but it's come at such a pace that, you actually have to be ginned up in it. Even if you're not a tech company, every company now is a tech company to some extent. But I think it's the soft skills that are the most important. I mean, they always have been to some extent, but I think you've got to have much more empathy than you used to. The world's become a very frightening place to a lot of people.
Do you think that most CEOs have found that they're no longer kings and queens because of technology, you're no longer locked into your town to get a job? You could be working for anybody in the world. I mean, my daughter has a global marketing practice and she's literally got clients all over the world. If somebody's unhappy, she's not dependent like we used to be on the clients that we got in the geographic area that we have. And I think maybe employees are the same.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's the land of opportunity. You're quite right. I think it's, that's incredible opportunities to be had. While at the same time, as I say, you've always had to put your team first. But I think you've really got to put them even more first than ever before, and their mental health. There's a big awareness of mental health now.
Jim, well, what do you think is the biggest concern of the CEOs that you interviewed? What's their concern going forward?
Biggest concern for any of them, I think. I'm trying to think if I can pull a generalization out of that one. Because I did, as you know, talk to people who are running very different businesses in very different sectors. I think on the whole, it's to do with people mostly, and how they're going to do right by their people, how, where they're focusing on, how they're developing that, and what impact their companies can have.
In terms of impacts in society and
on a big wide world, yeah.
Right. That, and making sure employees are happy that they enjoyed coming to work and that they're compensating them fairly.
Compensating them fairly is part of it, but of course it used to be dominant, whereas now it's become much more about development and obviously training, but support and so many other things, and work-life balance has become more important.
That is the biggest one. That's the biggest one for let's say people under the age of 35. I hear my daughter and young entrepreneurs I deal with that, this idea of working like we did, 12 hours a day, 6-7 days a week, or 15 hours a day. Yeah, I mean, I have them now asking, I want to have time for me and time for my significant other, and I want to be able to do all these things. And you're thinking, God, this idea of balance is really hard.
I think it's great. I mean, I think it's a good way for society to move. I think it's fantastic.
Is there any last piece of advice you would give to the entrepreneurs that are listening that you've learned from your book that maybe you didn't even think about because you and I are in the day-to-day of doing it all the time, but now that you've gotten a chance to step back and you wrote this book, is there any?
I think most of all, the whole thing has taught me and a chance to reflect over my own career, as you rightly say. I think it comes back to the people who are most successful are secure in themselves, and they acknowledge that they need to do an awful lot of self-development. And I think other people get in the way of their own progress if they're not careful, and if you're developing a company, you've got to develop yourself ahead of it and that much more than it.
Jan, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. I know it's late over in London. What time is it now?
It's coming up for 6 o'clock.
6 o'clock. Oh, well, just 6 o'clock in the afternoon.
No, it's not too bad at all. It's an absolute pleasure.
Well, thank you so much. I'm hoping you're going to write more books that will have you again. And we look forward to seeing you.
Well, thank you.
Everyone have a great, safe weekend. Look forward to seeing you next week. Take care.
Thank you all so much for listening.